It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon, the kind where the world seemed to hold its breath. Davis had just finished his workout, dropping his keys into the wooden bowl by the door. He was slicing an orange when she walked in. Eleanor. She wore a simple blue dress, a jacket draped over her arm, her heels clicking softly on the polished concrete floor. But her face was different. It was blank, empty of feeling. That made it worse. No anger, no sadness, just a cold, hard choice. She placed a thick brown envelope on the kitchen counter like she was handing him a grocery list. Then she looked at him and said, "I've received $10 million. I want a divorce. Be out by tonight." That was it. No pause, no flicker of doubt, just a sentence dropped like a heavy stone. Davis truly thought he'd heard wrong. He waited for a joke, a cruel laugh, anything to suggest he wasn't losing everything over a simple snack. But she didn't laugh. She just stood there, arms crossed, like she'd just fired him. Davis blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" "You heard me," she said. "My money came through. There's no need to pretend anymore. I'm done. I want my space back. I want my life back." His jaw tightened. It wasn't just the words, it was how easily she said them. 7 years of marriage, meals cooked, nights spent comforting each other after bad dreams, business plans he'd helped her build, all thrown away like a bad idea. He looked down at the envelope. His name was on it, bold and typed, no handwriting. That told him everything. She hadn't written this. She had planned it, maybe for weeks, maybe longer. He opened it slowly, the paper cutting his finger as he pulled out the documents. A small cut, but it felt like everything was bleeding out. Inside were the divorce papers, a clear list of demands. She was keeping the house, the cars, the art, the bank accounts. He was left with what he brought in, which she said was very little. He let out a slow breath. Not anger, not sorrow, just a deep disbelief that settled in his bones. Then he heard it, heavy footsteps. He turned and saw them, her twin brothers, Mark and Tom, 2 men who always had a smirk on their faces. They stood in the kitchen doorway like bad guys in a movie, arms crossed, their smugness thick like cheap perfume. "She doesn't need you anymore," Mark mumbled with a twisted smile. Davis didn't answer. He just looked at Mark, then back at Eleanor. She didn't flinch, didn't correct her brother, didn't try to make it easier. She just stood her ground. This was planned. He could see it now. Not a spur-of-the-moment choice. This had been brewing for weeks, maybe months. She'd waited until the money was in her account, until she had her brothers as backup, and then she'd made her move. Davis stepped back from the counter and ran a hand through his hair. "So that's it?" he asked. "You get your money and I'm thrown away?" She tilted her head, as if wondering why he was still standing there. "I don't love you anymore. I haven't for a long time. I stayed because I had to. Now I don't." If she had cried, he might have broken. If she had yelled, he might have fought. But she was cold, calculating, distant. He realized the woman in front of him wasn't the person he married. Or maybe she was. Maybe he had just refused to see it. His hand was still bleeding slightly from the paper cut. He wiped it on a napkin, then nodded slowly. "All right," he said quietly, "if that's what you want." She nodded once, like a queen giving permission to leave. He walked past her, not looking back. Not yet, not while they were watching. He went upstairs to the bedroom they once shared. It already felt strange. As he opened the closet, he saw empty spaces, things missing. His cufflinks, his tablet, a framed photo of his late mother. Gone. She'd been getting ready for this. Probably had excuses ready if he'd noticed earlier, but he hadn't because he trusted her. He opened his travel bag and began to pack. Not much, just the basics. The suit his father gave him, his old watch, the passport he kept hidden away. He moved with purpose, folding each shirt with the care you give to memories, not clothes. He could hear them downstairs, talking, laughing. The sound made his stomach turn. He grabbed his phone, opened his banking app. The joint accounts were already locked. His name was gone. Just like that. He smiled, not out of amusement, but because he realized something. They thought this was the end of him, but they had no idea who he really was. When he finally zipped his bag shut and took one last look at the room, he didn't feel sadness, he felt focus. He walked slowly down the stairs, his suitcase behind him. Eleanor was in the kitchen now, pouring wine. The nerve of it, a toast to betrayal. She didn't look up as he passed. Her brothers did. Mark tilted his head, clearly hoping for a reaction, a last word, but Davis gave him nothing. He walked out the front door and paused on the porch. Then he turned back and said, calm as stone, "You'll regret this, all of you." They laughed. That was fine. Let them laugh. They wouldn't be laughing for long, not after what he had planned. Not once he reminded them exactly who they had underestimated. Because this wasn't the end. No, this was the beginning. He wasn't even halfway down the driveway before she heard her voice cut through the air like glass. "Hey, that bag stays." He stopped. His fingers tightened around the suitcase handle, the one bag he'd managed to pack with a shred of dignity left. He turned slightly, just enough to see her storming out the front door barefoot, fury in her eyes, wine glass still in hand. "This is my personal stuff," he said as calmly as he could. "Clothes I bought with my own money, the watch my father left me, photos from my childhood." Eleanor threw her hand up like he'd insulted her. "Everything in this house is under my name, everything, and if you walk off with anything, it'll be theft." He stared at her in disbelief. "You really want to do this here, in front of your neighbors?" She didn't hesitate. "I don't care who's watching. You don't get to take anything from me." That's when he heard them again, Mark and Tom, footsteps pounding across the deck behind her like they'd been waiting for this moment. They came into view, one on each side of her, like twin bodyguards with a grudge and too much free time. "Didn't you hear her?" Mark said, folding his arms. "Drop the bag." "Don't make this harder than it has to be," Tom added. Davis looked from one to the other. They were built like strong trees, but spoke like teenagers trying to sound tough. Part of him wanted to laugh. Another part wanted to snap, but he stayed still. Years of holding things in for peace had trained him well. "I'm not leaving without my things," he said again. "You can throw me out, but I won't walk away like a stray dog." That's when it happened. Mark moved first. Davis didn't even see the punch, just felt a burning pull at his scalp as Mark grabbed a handful of his hair and yanked his head backward. The suitcase dropped from his hand with a hard thud on the walkway. Before he could get his balance, Tom was at his side, one arm hooked around his body, the other slamming into his shoulder. Davis twisted, shouted, tried to break free, but they didn't stop. They dragged him down the front steps like he weighed nothing. His back hit each step hard, scraping against the stone, his arms flailing to grab anything. He heard the sound of fabric ripping. His shirt? His pride? He couldn't tell. Somewhere behind them, Eleanor was yelling, "Get him out of here!" They threw him like a bag of trash onto the gravel at the bottom of the driveway. He hit the ground with a sickening crunch, the kind that tells your bones something's going to hurt tomorrow. He stayed still for a moment, not because he was scared, but because he knew if he got up too fast, he might lose control. And he couldn't afford to do that. Not now. Not in front of them. He wiped his lip. Blood. A thin, sharp line. He stood slowly, quietly. Tom smirked. "You're lucky we didn't call the police." Mark leaned against the porch rail like he'd just finished a workout. "You really thought she'd keep you after that money came in?" Eleanor stood in the doorway, arms crossed, face like stone. "This house was never yours," she said. "This life was never yours." Davis didn't answer. He just looked at her for a long moment, not at her makeup or her hair or the expensive robe she wore like armor. He looked at the part she didn't control, her eyes. There was a flicker there. Not regret, not sadness, but fear. Fear that he wasn't broken, that maybe he was just quiet. He reached down, picked up his suitcase, now scuffed and dirty, and rolled his wrist to check his watch. Still ticking. Good. He looked back at all three of them, these so-called giants in their little castle, and said in the calmest tone he'd ever used, "You'll regret this, all of you." Tom laughed like it was a joke. "Oh, you're going to sue us? Cry to a judge? Please, you have nothing. You're just mad she finally figured you out." Davis smiled, a real one this time, the kind that doesn't reach your eyes. "I'm not mad," he said. "I'm wide awake." Eleanor flinched, only slightly, but he saw it. She knew him better than they did, knew he wasn't a yeller, wasn't a fighter. He was a builder, a planner, and she had just given him something he hadn't had in years, a reason. He turned and walked away slowly, not limping, not running, just walking, his feet steady, his mind racing. Every step he took was another nail in the coffin of the life she thought she ended. Every footfall was a promise. Because here's the thing no one tells you. When someone strips everything away from you, you stop being afraid of loss. You start seeing clearly. You remember who you are. And Davis remembered. He remembered every late night he spent teaching himself computer code while she slept, every investor meeting he took while pretending he was just a consultant, every share he bought under different names, every paper he filed that she never bothered to read. This wasn't the end of his story. This was the spark. They thought throwing him out of the house would be the big moment, but it was just the beginning of the first chapter. They thought he had nothing left, but they forgot one thing. He built her, and he could build again, this time without her, this time better, smarter, stronger. And when he did, he wouldn't yell, he wouldn't knock, he'd just show up, and they'd know. They'd know they dragged the wrong man down those steps, and that everything they laughed at that day was going to fall apart in silence. The first night outside, he stayed at a hotel, a quiet one on the edge of town with soft lights and worn carpets. Nothing fancy, just somewhere with a bed, a desk, and silence. That's all he needed. Silence. It's funny how after someone tries to destroy you, the first thing you miss is peace. Not revenge, not power, just peace. He sat on the edge of that bed for a long time, staring at the wall. His body was still sore from being handled like a rag doll, his lips swollen, his scalp tender. But inside, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Stillness, like when you hold your breath underwater and finally rise to the surface. They thought they had thrown him out, left him with nothing, but what they didn't understand, what Eleanor never cared to ask, was who he really was before he ever walked into her world. She met him when he was quiet, as she liked to say, low maintenance, a man who didn't mind fading into the background. She used to brag about how he didn't take up much space. What she never asked was why he didn't, because he had already done that part of life, the spotlight, the risk, the chaos, and he had walked away from it all for peace, for simplicity, for her. He used to be Davis Thorne, not the husband who helped with the books, not the man who used to work in tech. He was a co-founder of Horizon Systems. They built high-level computer security systems. Their software protected data for governments, hospitals, even space programs. They sold it 5 years ago, quietly split the deal. He took his $18.2 million and disappeared from the news because he wanted a life with flashing cameras and worried meetings. He wanted a home, a woman he could believe in. And for a while, he thought Eleanor was that woman. She never knew. She never wanted to know. She liked the version of him that wore jeans and made omelets on Sundays. She told people he did freelance work, and he let her. It was easier. Let her have the spotlight. Let her father believe he was the one who inspired her to launch her own brand. Let her brothers joke about how he was good with tools. He let them think he was small. Why? Because he didn't care if they thought he was powerful. He cared if she thought he was good. Turns out that wasn't enough. Now, sitting in that dimly lit hotel room with a bag of clothes and a bleeding lip, he wasn't bitter. He wasn't even angry anymore. He was awake. He opened his laptop, still had it, still clean, still fast. He logged into one of his backup servers, accessed a series of encrypted files he hadn't touched in years. There they were. Portfolios, assets, holdings. He hadn't just sat around after selling Horizon Systems. He'd invested smartly in many different areas all over the world: real estate, clean energy, artificial intelligence. Most of it was in trusts that didn't carry his name. His real net worth was closer to $27 million, not including the land he owned in the mountains or the rights he'd quietly bought through his dummy company, Summit Holdings. Eleanor didn't know any of this because she never asked. She never noticed the trips he took for coding jobs were actually meetings with big money managers. She never questioned the plain mail he got from offshore islands. She thought he was simple, and he let her because he thought love didn't need a resume. That's on him. He scrolled through the list of properties, accounts, and companies he had kept in the shadows. Nothing flashy, just clean and protected. He wasn't the richest man alive, but he wasn't the broken fool they thought they tossed onto the curb either. They had poked the bear, and now the bear was wide awake. He made a list. It wasn't dramatic, just bullet points typed into a notes app. But every name on that list, they had laughed at him, mocked him, touched him without permission, tried to erase him. Eleanor, Mark, Tom. He wouldn't scream at them. He wouldn't threaten them. He would just start pulling the threads quietly, one by one. He took out his phone and called a name he hadn't dialed in 3 years. Liam Stone. Old friend, real estate lawyer, smart, careful, and he owed Davis big time. Liam answered on the second ring. "Liam, it's time," Davis said. Silence on the other end, then, "You're serious?" "Dead serious. Tell me where to meet you." By the next morning, Davis was sitting across from Liam in his office, papers spread across the large wooden table. Liam blinked when he saw the assets. "They have no idea this is you. None. Wow." Davis just smiled. "Let's begin with the Evergreen estate." Liam raised an eyebrow. "Her family's? It's not fully theirs, not yet." He flipped through the scanned documents Davis handed him, a joint agreement from Eleanor's grandfather's estate plan. "You're listed here as co-trustee in the event of a legal separation or divorce." "Yes, Eleanor's brothers are building on the land," Davis nodded, "with permits based on incomplete transfers. The land technically belongs to a dormant company, which I now control." Liam laughed softly, shaking his head. "You really are the most polite wolf I've ever met." "No," Davis said, "I'm just done being underestimated." They filed the legal order that same afternoon. It would take a few days to process, but when the sheriff showed up at that gate, they'd remember who Davis was. And more importantly, they'd realize they never knew him at all. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't just break you, it sharpens you if you let it. Most people lash out, burn bridges, throw fits. That's not Davis. He doesn't explode, he adjusts. And when he walked into Liam's office that morning after leaving the hotel, he was already 3 steps into a game they didn't know they were playing. Liam leaned back in his chair, staring at the old estate documents like they were hidden treasure. He tapped the screen with a grin. "So, they really don't know about this?" "Nope. You're still listed as co-trustee in the Evergreen Trust. That's wild." Davis nodded. "Her grandfather and I had a different kind of relationship. Every Thursday we'd have dinner. He liked to talk about business, ideas, what lasts. He didn't trust his grandsons. And Eleanor, he loved her, but he didn't respect her judgment." Liam chuckled. "And now those grandsons are tearing down his guest house to build a game room on land that hasn't been properly transferred, which gives us power." He looked at Davis with that same slow, careful smile he'd seen him wear back in college when they hacked the campus firewall just for fun. "You're playing the long game. I'm just restoring balance." Within hours, they filed the paperwork. Clean, quiet, no announcement. A legal order to stop construction on the Evergreen estate based on unclear ownership and a pending co-trustee dispute. It would take a few days to go through the system. Perfect. That gave Davis time to prepare the next step. He left Liam's office and walked 2 blocks to a place he hadn't visited in over a year, a storage unit on the east side of town. Inside, buried under old equipment and boxes of archived data, were the files he needed. Eleanor used to tease him about being overly careful, always keeping paper copies of legal documents. "Everything's online now," she'd say. "Sure, but firewalls can be hacked. Paper is quiet." And in these boxes, he had copies of offshore transfers, hidden partnerships, and real estate deeds, all under names she never knew. He spent the next 2 nights reviewing everything. Old passwords still worked, the trusts were safe, the shell companies were untouched. It felt like waking up an old machine, slow at first, but deadly once running. The first financial move he made was subtle. He rerouted profits from one of his overseas investments, a small property group in Paris, straight into a newly opened local account under a fresh fake name. Then he did something even simpler. He bought a powerful computer server setup for home use, delivered to a private office he just leased under a different name. He was rebuilding his lab. And he wasn't alone. Liam wasn't the only person he reached out to. He called Clara Bell, a corporate lawyer and money expert who once helped him stop a bad company takeover before Eleanor and he ever met. They hadn't spoken in 5 years, but when she heard what happened, she said, "Tell me where to show up and what to wear." 2 days later, she was at his office in a navy blue suit, heels that clicked with authority, and a fire in her eyes. "She really dragged you out by your hair?" she asked as they sipped coffee. "Yep." "Good," she said, setting her mug down. "Then she has no idea what's coming." They worked non-stop. Davis laid out everything, his holdings, her known assets, the company. Clara grinned as she reviewed it. "You're going to win this war in silence. That's the point." 4 days later, the Evergreen estate order was approved. The sheriff delivered it in person. Davis wasn't there to watch, but Liam told him what happened. The workers had already started tearing down the guesthouse roof. Mark and Tom were outside laughing about a hot tub design when the police car pulled into the long gravel driveway. The moment the envelope was handed over, everything stopped. Hard hats came off, power tools shut down, work trucks reversed out of the property like they were running from a crime scene. The twins argued with the officer, yelled, tried to act tough, claimed they didn't know, but the deputy wasn't interested in drama. He just pointed to the official stamp and said, "This building is no longer allowed to be changed until ownership is clear in court." Ownership, a word they had never questioned, a word they assumed was their right. Eleanor called Davis that night. He was expecting the voicemail, but this time she used a new tone. Less arrogance, more confusion. "You're behind this, aren't you?" she said. "Don't play dumb, Davis. The sheriff showed up at my family's estate. My brothers nearly got arrested. You're trying to ruin us." He let her talk, let her run out of steam. Then he spoke calmly. "You never asked how your grandfather and I got along. You never wondered why he always poured me the wine first at dinner. He didn't just like me, Eleanor. He trusted me more than he trusted your brothers, maybe even more than he trusted you." Her silence was like static on the line. "What do you want?" she finally asked. "Nothing you're offering," Davis said, "but you'll be hearing from my attorney soon." He ended the call before she could reply. The following day, he got a notification. An emergency meeting had been called by the Evergreen family lawyers. The estate was frozen. Her brothers were officially forbidden from doing any more renovations or deals until the trust dispute was solved. Eleanor's name was now tied up in court documents, and this was just the beginning. They'd poked the bear. Now the bear had claws, and Davis was only getting started. By the time the court order froze the estate, the cracks had started to show. Davis wasn't sitting on some throne laughing in victory. He was at his desk in a small rented office space with cold coffee, watching the whole house of cards begin to lean. And the best part? He hadn't even touched the structure. He just pulled out the pin they never noticed was holding it all together. Eleanor's brothers had started building on the guest house weeks before the inheritance money even came through. Overconfident, arrogant, and foolish, they assumed the land would transfer smoothly to Eleanor. They assumed Davis wouldn't be around long enough to matter. They were wrong on both counts. Now they were facing legal action from the local planning department for unauthorized construction on disputed property. Contractors were threatening to sue them for breaking their agreements. Equipment rental fees were piling up, and the renovation was dead in the water. It was a chain reaction, and Davis was just sitting back, letting gravity do its work. Clara sent him a message. "Probate hearing is confirmed. Eleanor's being called." He smirked. She would have to stand before a judge and answer for the clause her family overlooked, a clause hidden in Grandfather Evergreen's will. One line buried in the small print. In the event of dissolution of marriage, co-trustee responsibilities and partial ownership default to the surviving spouse. me. He still remembered the day he found that clause. Eleanor and he were newlyweds, and her grandfather invited him to his lakeside house for a private dinner, just the two of them. He handed Davis a glass of scotch and said, "Eleanor is smart, but not always wise. You're steady, you're grounded." Davis thought it was a compliment. Now he realized it was a warning. The probate hearing was held in a stone building downtown. Davis didn't attend in person. He didn't need to. Clara handled everything. He just watched the results from a distance. According to her report, Eleanor walked in wearing a pearl gray suit and defiance like perfume. She thought it would be a simple formality, something she could handle with a few sharp words and a hired lawyer. Then Clara stood up and presented the clause. The judge's eyebrows went up. The room got quiet. Eleanor's lawyer whispered something to her. And for the first time in years, she lost her cool in public. She stormed out during a break, Clara told him, muttering something about Davis never being important enough to be written into the will. He laughed out loud at that one. She really didn't know. She had no clue. Not about the dinners, the trust, or that her grandfather kept him in the loop. Clara paused before continuing. She asked me how you knew about the clause. Davis raised an eyebrow. And what did you say? I told her the truth, that you'd earned it, that you didn't need to spy. You just needed to read. Later that afternoon, Eleanor called again, but this time her tone wasn't angry. It was tight, afraid, like someone trying to keep hold of a rope slipping through their fingers. "What is it you want, Davis?" she asked quietly. He stayed silent for a moment, letting the question hang there, because he knew it wasn't really a question. It was a surrender, an unspoken admission that her carefully built empire was starting to shake. "I don't want anything," he said. "I'm just claiming what was always mine. The land, the brand, the story. I want the truth back in my name." "That's not a legal term," Tom said. "It's not legal advice," Davis replied. "It's a condition." Mark frowned. "You're trying to ruin our family." Davis sipped his drink. "No, I'm just showing people who your family really is." Eleanor's voice dropped lower. "What would it take for this to stop?" Davis looked her in the eyes. Calm, direct. "A public apology. One that admits what you did. One that clears my name and confirms my role in everything you built." "That's unreasonable." "No, Mark," Davis cut in. "What was unreasonable was dragging a man by his hair down a flight of stairs in front of his neighbors. What was unreasonable was freezing his accounts, bad-mouthing him to family and friends, and laughing while erasing his contributions." Mark shifted uncomfortably. Eleanor swallowed hard. "I built that brand," she whispered. "It was my vision." "And I never said it wasn't. But I filed the trademark. I protected it. I supported it when it was nothing more than a sketch and a dream. I paid for the first trial runs. I negotiated the first supplier contract you forgot to read. I never asked for credit, Eleanor, until you turned on me like I was a stranger." Silence. That was the moment it happened. The mask cracked fully this time. She blinked quickly, eyes wet, lips slightly trembling. Not the fake kind, the real kind. The one you try to hide in public when the weight of everything hits you at once. "I didn't think you'd fight back," she said softly. "I know." She looked down, then away. The world around them carried on. Clinking forks, quiet laughter, a child somewhere giggling in the background. But at that table, it was just them. 4 people sitting on the ruins of arrogance and assumption. Eleanor reached into her purse and pulled out a folded paper. She placed it gently on the table. Davis didn't touch it. "It's a statement," she said. "It doesn't say everything, but it's a start. A public acknowledgement of your role, your ownership, your partnership." He stared at it. "Why now?" "Because I'm losing everything," she whispered. "And you're not yelling, you're not gloating, you're just winning." That part stung her the most, he thought. That he didn't come back with fire. That he came back with facts, with structure, with precision. that he didn't need to humiliate her to defeat her. Mark looked at him. "If she signs it, will you stop?" "No," Davis said plainly, "but I'll consider it the beginning of an ending, a civilized one." Tom rolled his eyes. "This is all about pride." "No," Davis said, rising from his seat. "This is about justice, something your family never respected." He picked up the paper and walked out without another word. Outside, the sun was warm. Outside, the sun was warm. His heart wasn't racing. His palms weren't sweaty. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt steady, balanced. She had finally seen him. Not the ghost husband, not the handyman with a laptop, not the invisible investor, but the man, the builder, the one they tried to erase. And now that the mask had cracked, there was no putting it back on. People think revenge is loud. They imagine shouting matches, dramatic fights, maybe someone throwing a glass across the room. But Davis had learned something different, something quieter. Revenge, when done right, isn't chaos. It's control. Not in the shouting, but in the silence that follows. Not in the fire, but in the shadows that spread when you remove someone's light. That's why he bought the ad space, a full-page spread in City Life magazine, Eleanor's favorite. She once told a journalist that being featured there was her definition of success. She framed that article in her home office. It was still hanging the last time he saw it. The ad took up the entire back page, a clean white background, centered, unmissable text in elegant black font. "To the Evergreen family, thank you for showing me who you really are. I forgive you, but I'll never forget. I've moved on, stronger, sharper, free." And below that, the logo of his new firm, Phoenix Reclaim Group, a consulting agency for betrayed spouses. For every man and woman who'd ever been thrown out, erased, blindsided, and told they didn't matter, this was a place to rebuild, quietly, powerfully. He didn't need to rub salt in the wound. He simply let the world know that he was still here, still standing, and now he was helping others do the same. The ad ran on a Sunday. By Monday, his inbox had over 200 inquiries. By Wednesday, he had his first client, a woman from the countryside thrown out by her husband after she put him through medical school. She cried during their video call, said she didn't want revenge, just peace. He told her peace was possible, but sometimes peace required strong defenses, careful money checks, and a lawyer who didn't blink. And he knew just the team to give her that. Eleanor, meanwhile, was crumbling. The public apology she gave at their last meeting didn't fix things. Not really. Her brand, already under scrutiny after the trademark problem, took a nosedive. Retailers who had once boasted about being powered by Eleanor's passion now quietly removed her name from their catalogs. Then the influencer fallout began. She'd spent years building her image, dinners with fashion editors, photo shoots in sunny vineyards, interviews where she smiled like betrayal never lived in her bones. But the moment his ad dropped, everything changed. People started digging. Screenshots resurfaced. A post from a year ago where she thanked my husband for being my calm while I chased the storm. Someone commented, "Is this the same man you kicked out of the house when the inheritance came in?" The comment got thousands of likes. Her sponsors noticed. 2 beauty companies dropped her within a week. A luxury hair care brand issued a vague, realigning with our values statement that didn't mention her name, but everyone knew. She posted a video, tearful, filtered, practiced. "I've made mistakes," she said, voice trembling just the right amount. "I was in pain. I acted from fear, but I never meant to hurt anyone." It might have worked, except the next day, City Life magazine published a follow-up, an editorial piece titled "The Cost of Power When Love is Just a Brand Strategy." The article didn't accuse her of anything directly, but it asked hard questions. Questions like, what happens when a woman builds a business on borrowed loyalty? What happens when the person in the background decides to speak? They included his ad in the piece, blurred out in the background, but unmistakable. Davis didn't write a rebuttal, didn't give an interview, didn't say a word, because silence, when earned, is louder than noise. Eleanor called again, this time from a private number. He didn't answer. She left a voicemail. "Please, can we talk? Just for 5 minutes." She sounded tired, like someone who'd been walking through fog for too long and finally realized it was smoke. He listened to it twice, then deleted it. Because here's what no one tells you about healing. You don't owe it to the person who broke you. That week, Davis hosted a free online workshop, Rebuilding After Betrayal. He expected maybe 40 attendees. They got over 600. Divorced women, abandoned fathers, stay-at-home spouses cut out of business deals, quiet geniuses who had been used, discarded, or erased. And every single one of them said the same thing in some form. I just want to feel seen again. That became their mission. Not revenge, but restoration. The Phoenix Reclaim group grew fast. Too fast, maybe, but Davis was ready. He hired 2 legal assistants, partnered with a firm in the city, built out a network for referrals. The money came in, so did the stories. And Eleanor? She vanished. Her social media accounts went dark, her website redirected to a broken page. The Eleanor Evergreen Signature Collection was officially marked discontinued on 4 major beauty platforms. He got a letter from her lawyers offering to sell back the brand for very little money. He declined. It wasn't about the name, it was about the principle. One morning, about a month later, Davis stood in front of a mirror. Same man, same eyes, same steady hands, but different. Not angry, just clear. Clear about who he was, what he'd survived, and who he was becoming. His phone buzzed, an email alert, another client, another story, another life ready to be rebuilt. He smiled, because the woman who once told him he didn't take up space had watched him carve out a place in the world without raising his voice. And in doing so, he'd become what she never expected: unforgettable. He didn't think he'd ever walk through that front door again, not after what happened, not after the staircase, the suitcase, the blood on his lip. But life has a way of circling back, especially when you've done the hard work of standing still while others collapse under the weight of their own arrogance. It was a Wednesday morning when Clara called. Her voice was casual, but he heard the smile hidden in her words. "The estate's been revalued. Your counterclaim was approved this morning." Davis blinked. "Wait, already?" She chuckled. "You're back on title, fully." He didn't say anything for a moment, just stared at the window in his office, watching sunlight stretch across the hardwood floor. "Davis," she said, "it's yours again, every inch." That afternoon, he drove out to the property. He didn't rush. He wasn't going for war or old memories. He was going to see what remained after they tried to erase him. The gates were still as grand as he remembered, black iron etched with the Evergreen family crest. He pulled up slowly, waiting for the guard to stop him. There was no guard, just movers. 2 trucks in the driveway, boxes being carried out, tape guns screeching, labels written in frantic, messy handwriting. Eleanor had chosen to leave. Her attorney had called Clara the night before, offered to leave quietly if they agreed not to pursue damages. Davis had already gotten everything he needed, emotionally, legally, financially. He didn't need to crush her. She was doing that all by herself. The door creaked when he opened it. Same marble floors, same cold air. But the house felt smaller somehow. Not physically, spiritually. It had lost its illusion. Gone were the echoes of fake laughter, the staged dinner parties, the tight smiles meant to impress people who didn't care. He walked through the entrance hall and into the living room. The walls were bare, no paintings, no carefully arranged bookshelf, no matching gold vases lined up just so. There was a single box in the corner marked miscellaneous. Inside it, a photo of Eleanor and her brothers at the estate launch party. She was in her white power suit, the same one she wore the night she told him to leave. He didn't pick it up, just stared at it a moment, then turned away. He walked room to room, taking it all in. The upstairs office where he used to handle the money for her business, before he learned she'd replaced his name on everything. The guest room where her brothers once slept off their hangovers after long nights of pretending they owned the place. The master bedroom where she handed him divorce papers with the smugness of someone who thought they'd won. It was empty now, except for the ghost of a life that had never really been his. In the kitchen, he found a few stray glasses and a crumpled note left on the counter. It just read, "I thought this house would protect me. Turns out you were the only one who ever did." No signature, but he knew the handwriting. He folded the note, not out of sentiment, but because it was the first time in months she'd said something true. A few minutes later, he stepped outside to the patio where the guest house once stood. Now it was a mess. The renovation had been stopped mid-project. Wood beams exposed, tiles scattered. The foundation cracked where they tried to pour a hot tub pit. The dreams they had built on stolen ground had collapsed right into the dirt. He stood there, hands in his pockets, just listening. Silence. Not the empty kind, the peaceful kind. He didn't rebuild it into a luxury suite or a game room or a guest lodge. He turned it into a justice center. 6 months later, the house became the headquarters of the Thorn Foundation for Reinvention, a nonprofit he started to help people reclaim their lives after emotional and financial abuse, divorce, betrayal, being cut out of inheritances, gaslighting, the quiet traumas that leave loud echoes. The first floor became an intake center for legal help and temporary support. The upper floor housed a temporary living program for clients leaving harmful households. They called it the Reclaim Wing. The evergreen name was completely removed from the deed. No trace left. One of the first people they helped was a woman named Sarah, mid-30s, quiet voice, big eyes filled with shame she didn't deserve. Her ex had emptied her accounts, claimed her invention as his own, and left her with nothing but debt and therapy bills. She cried when they helped her secure a patent under her own name. Said it was the first time she felt real in 2 years. Another man, Leo, was a retired firefighter whose son had stolen his pension and forged a signature on a reverse mortgage. He walked into their center defeated, walked out 2 weeks later with a financial advisor, an attorney, and a new will. Davis didn't just rebuild a house. He built a lighthouse, not to signal his triumph, but to guide others through the storm. Because what they tried to bury him with, he turned into bricks. Not revenge, but legacy. Illinois never returned to the property. Davis suspected she didn't have the courage to. Her name popped up once or twice in small news pieces. A podcast interview where she talked about lessons learned and mistakes that made her stronger. He didn't listen to the full thing. He didn't need to. She lost the one thing she valued more than money: control. He never gloated, never showed up uninvited, never called to say, "I told you so." He didn't need to say it. The house said it for him. Every person who walked through those doors, every survivor who found safety inside those walls, every life rebuilt, every truth restored, it all whispered the same thing. You never should have dragged him out, because now he owns everything you tried to take. It was almost poetic, really. A year to the day since she told him to pack his things and be gone by dinner. Davis stood on a stage under soft lights, a microphone in his hand, and an auditorium full of people watching as he shared his story. Not with bitterness, but with clarity. It wasn't a courtroom. It wasn't a podcast. It was the Global Innovation and Ethics Summit, a gathering of smart thinkers, business owners, and creators from around the world, a place he hadn't been invited to in nearly 6 years. Back when he had walked away from the tech industry after selling Horizon Systems, he thought he was done with stages. But life, as it turns out, wasn't done with him. The host, a sharp woman named Maya Chen, introduced him simply. Please welcome Davis Thorn, the man who reclaimed everything. There was polite applause, respectful, and curious. Most of them had read about him in one article or another. The man who launched a startup, vanished, and reappeared not with a new app, but with a non-profit that shook the divorce world to its core. He walked up slowly, no nerves, no pretense, just presence. Lena sat in the front row, his wife, yes, wife, and beside her, their daughter, 5 months old, fast asleep against her chest. He never imagined this would be his life again. After Eleanor, after the betrayal, the dragging, the silence, he didn't think he'd love again. But life, when you clear out the wreckage, has a strange way of blooming. Lena had seen him at his lowest. Not the part where he was tossed out like furniture, but the aftermath, the rebuilding. She met him not as the man who'd been broken, but the one who chose to rise anyway. They weren't flashy. They didn't wear matching luxury watches or take sunset selfies in exotic places. They were steady, quiet, real, and that was enough. He adjusted the mic, looked out at the faces, waiting for some profound insight, and smiled. You all want to know how I built Horizon Systems, he began. But what I'd rather tell you is how I rebuilt myself, because that took longer cost more, and changed me more than any tech ever could. There was a hum of agreement. He kept going. Last year, on this exact day, I was standing in a driveway with blood on my lip and everything I thought I loved behind a locked door. I'd been dragged out of my house, literally told I wasn't needed anymore, that I didn't own anything, that I was disposable. He paused and let it hang. A few people shifted in their seats. Some nodded. I didn't yell. I didn't fight back that night. I didn't curse or scream or throw anything. I just looked at them and said, "You'll regret this." Then I walked away. He could see Maya in the wings, arms folded, eyes locked in. She wasn't checking a timer. She was listening. I wasn't bluffing, he said. I'd spent years making myself small so someone else could shine, letting people believe I was just the quiet guy in the background, a helpful husband, a sidekick. He stepped forward, one hand gesturing. But here's the thing. Just because someone forgets your worth doesn't mean it disappears. It just waits quietly until you're ready to reclaim it. A slow clap started in the back. He didn't stop. Within a year, I took back everything they tried to erase. The land, the brand, the dignity. And I didn't do it with revenge in mind. I did it with vision, precision, calm. He turned and glanced at the screen behind him where the Phoenix Reclaim Group logo glowed proudly. Now I run a foundation that helps others do the same. Not by yelling louder, not by throwing punches, but by building again, smarter, cleaner, from the ashes of what was lost. He could see a few teary eyes, people nodding, a man in the second row mouthing, "Thank you." Then came the question that always comes. Someone raised a hand, a journalist he recognized. "What advice," he asked, "would you give someone who's just been betrayed by the person they love the most?" Davis looked at him for a moment. No rush, no dramatic pause, just the truth. "Don't yell," he said. "Don't chase, don't sink to their level. Just build in silence and let your success choke every lie they ever told about you." The room went still. Then the applause came. Not loud and fake, but real, long, deep. Afterward, people lined up to shake his hand. Not fans, but survivors, widows, single dads, business owners who'd lost everything. A woman who whispered, "You saved me from going back." He nodded to each of them, took no credit, just listened. Later, as he stepped off the stage, Lena wrapped one arm around his waist. Their daughter stirred in her carrier, yawned, and clutched at his shirt with a tiny hand. "You did it," Lena whispered. "No," he said, "I became it." On the drive home, the city lights blurred past their windows. He thought of Eleanor, who had once smirked while saying, "You're not taking anything from here." And now, a year later, he sat in a car he owned beside a woman who saw him, really saw him. And in the back seat was a little girl with his smile. He checked the watch on his wrist, the one Eleanor had once tried to claim in court. She lost that claim like everything else. But it wasn't the loss that mattered. It was the realization. She thought it was over when she threw him out. She thought that dragging him down the stairs, freezing his accounts, and rewriting history meant she'd won. But she forgot something important. You can't destroy someone who knows how to rebuild. You can't bury a man who remembers where he planted his roots. So, as they pulled into their driveway, he smiled. Not out of revenge, but out of peace. Because the man they dragged out by his hair, he didn't just survive. He became the blueprint. And now, he owns the world they used to rule.